Have you ever just looked around and been completely blown away by the incredible, almost overwhelming variety of life on this planet? From the tiniest insect to the biggest whale. It's just amazing. But the big question is, how did we even get here? How did our world get filled with all this mind-boggling diversity? Well, to answer that, we actually have to start with a much smaller question.
So, let's zoom way in. Take a look at these Chapman zebras. You see, every single one of them has a stripe pattern that's totally unique, kind of like a human fingerprint. So why? Is it just random? No way. The answer to this little puzzle is actually the key to understanding all of life's diversity. And it all starts with one simple but really powerful idea.
And that idea is variation. This is it. This is the spark. It's the raw material that allows life to change, to adapt, to become something new over time. So what exactly is it? Well, simply put, variation just means the differences we see among individuals of the same species. Think about ladybugs, right? Some have a ton of spots, some have just a few. Some are a brighter red, some are more orange. Those are all variations of the same basic ladybug blueprint. And this is absolutely crucial, because without these little differences, life would have basically hit a dead end billions of years ago. Okay, but here's a really important distinction. Not all variation is created equal. Let's say you go to the gym and build a lot of muscle. That's a variation for sure, but it's caused by your environment. You're not going to pass those muscles down to your kids. The kind of variation that really matters for the grand story of life is genetic variation, differences in the genes themselves, because that is what can be passed down. That's the stuff evolution gets to work with.
So where does all this game-changing genetic variation come from? Well, it boils down to two main sources. First, you've got mutations. These are just tiny, spontaneous changes in DNA that can sometimes create brand new traits out of thin air. And second, you've got sexual reproduction, which is basically like taking two decks of cards, one from each parent, shuffling them together, and dealing a completely unique hand for every single offspring.
All right, so we've got the spark, which is variation. But, variation by itself is just potential. It doesn't really go anywhere. It needs an engine to drive all that change. And that engine is one of the most famous, most powerful ideas in all of science, Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. Natural selection is basically a filter. It's the process where the environment selects which individuals get to survive and pass on their genes. And here is the absolute key. It is not about being stronger or better in some general sense. It's about having the specific traits that give you an edge in a particular environment at a particular time.
Darwin's logic was just beautiful. It starts with a simple fact. Organisms make way more offspring than can possibly survive. And remember, all those offspring have variations. So that sets up a struggle for existence, a competition for food, for mates, for everything. In that struggle, the individuals who happen to have helpful traits are more likely to win out, survive, and have more babies. And of course, they pass those winning traits on. Now, just repeat that process for thousands, millions of generations, and bam, you get evolution.
The classic giraffe example shows this perfectly. An older idea, from a scientist named Lamarck, was that giraffes stretched their necks during their lifetimes to reach leaves and then passed that stretched neck onto their kids. But Darwin's idea, the one that's supported by all the evidence, is different. He said there was already variation in the population. Some giraffes were just born with slightly longer necks than others. Those ones could reach more food, so they survived better, had more kids, and passed on their long neck genes. Simple as that.
And we can see this in the real world. The peppered moth is an incredible example. Before the Industrial Revolution, on clean, light-colored trees, the light-colored moths were perfectly camouflaged from birds. They survived. But then, pollution covered all those trees in dark soot, and suddenly, the dark-colored moths had the advantage. The fittest trait completely flipped, all because the environment changed.
So, what happens when you let this engine of natural selection run on the fuel of variation for about 3.5 billion years across every single environment on Earth? You get the spectacular result, biodiversity.
Biodiversity is the big picture. It's the grand total of all that variation across all the species living in all the different habitats on our planet. You can think of it as the complete library of life.
And we can look at this incredible library on 3 different levels. You've got genetic diversity, that's the variety within a single species, like our zebras with their unique stripes. Then there's species diversity, that's the number of different types of species in one area. And finally, you have ecosystem diversity, the variety of whole habitats, like forests, coral reefs, deserts, and so on.
And there is probably no better place on Earth to see this whole process in action than the Galapagos Islands. This isolated chain of islands, each with its own little microenvironment, acted as the perfect natural laboratory where Darwin could literally watch evolution unfold.
So here's the puzzle that Darwin stumbled on. A long, long time ago, a single species of finch somehow made its way to the islands from the mainland. But today, there are more than a dozen different species of finch there. How did one turn into so many?
It's the exact same story we've been talking about, just on a grander scale. See, the original finches had variation in their beak shapes. On an island with really tough seeds, the birds with thick, strong beaks had an advantage and survived. But on another island where the main food was insects hiding in tree bark, birds with thin, pointy beaks did better. Over millions of years, isolated on their own separate islands, they became so different that they couldn't even interbreed anymore. And just like that, new species were born.
Okay, so now we get how this incredible variety of life came to be. But so what? Why does any of this actually matter to us right here, right now?
Well, probably the single most important reason is this: diversity creates stability. An ecosystem with tons of different species is like a building with lots of different support beams. If one beam fails, the whole building doesn't just collapse. It's resilient. It can handle change and bounce back from disturbances.
And beyond just stability, we are directly dependent on this library of life for our own survival. I mean, just look at this list. Our food, our clothing, our shelter, even our medicines. Penicillin, one of the most important discoveries ever, comes from a fungus. Life-saving cancer treatments come from the yew tree. We are drawing from nature's vast genetic library every single day.
And this brings us to a pretty critical point. This library, which took billions of years to write, is now under threat, and protecting it is honestly one of the greatest challenges of our time.
The threats are, unfortunately, numerous, and they're almost all driven by us. We clear forests for cities and farms, which breaks up habitats into tiny, isolated pieces. We take too much, too fast, through things like overhunting and poaching. Our pollution is changing the climate on a global scale, and we accidentally introduce invasive species that can just completely wreck a native ecosystem.
But here's the good news. This situation is not hopeless. Not at all, because for every single one of those threats, there's a solution. We know how to protect and restore habitats. We have really clever ways to reconnect them. We can enforce laws against poaching, and we can tackle pollution. The solutions are right there, in our hands.
Just take ecological corridors, for example. It's such a powerful and hopeful idea. It could be something as simple as a protected strip of forest connecting two larger parks, or even a literal bridge for wildlife built over a busy highway. It's a simple concept with a huge impact because it allows animal populations to mix again, preventing isolation and giving them a path to survive in our modern, fragmented world. So we end here. This whole process, this engine of evolution, has written an absolutely epic, interconnected story across our planet. This library of life has millions of unique books, and each one is the result of an unbroken chain stretching back billions of years. The question for us right now is a simple one. Which of these stories will we choose to save?